Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Are you ready to start? My name is Pasi Sahlberg. Thanks for coming here. I was a visiting scholar at the Arizona State University, but now I'm back in Helsinki, Finland, Helsinki, where my home is. Let me begin by telling you a story. This story is almost true, but you have to figure out what part is not. This happened to me about 2 years ago. I spent recently 3 years in Massachusetts. I was teaching there at one of the universities. And one spring day, I was driving to upstate New York to give a talk in a conference like this. It was smaller than this, but the issues were the same. And I arrived at the conference site a little bit late for lunch, but a little bit too early for the actual program. So when I entered the conference, the venue, there was a host greeting me and asked me if I still want to have some lunch before the work begins, and I said sure. So I was escorted to a restaurant where obviously all the other participants had already had their lunches, and I was seated on an empty table. As soon as I sat down, there was another person joining me with the same purpose. He was also a speaker at the conference, and as usual, I introduced myself to him. I said that my name is Pasi Sahlberg. I'm a Finnish educator and scholar and author. And he looked at me and introduced himself, saying that my name is George Pataki. And of course, that name didn't ring any of my bells, and we sat down, and I asked George, so what do you do, George? And he said that I'm a farmer, that I have a farm down the road here, and so I love cows and bulls and horses. And I saw George's hands and I said that, but George, and you know, he had a beautiful suit and a haircut and nails and everything. I said, but you don't look like a farmer, you must have another job. So he looked at me and said that, yeah, I used to run the state for 3 terms. And I looked at him and said, that, are you the George Pataki, the governor? And he said, yes, I'm the man. So that's where the lunch conversation started, and we ordered our meals, and I thought that if anybody has been a governor of one of the great states here in the United States called the New York State, he or she must have a good view or opinion about education. So my first mistake during that lunch was to ask George what he thinks about American education. And he gave me this about 3-minute presentation there on the spot about all the problems and issues that he sees in American schools, starting from bad teachers and poor schools and all these things that you know very well. And I was hoping after this, that he would not ask me my opinion. So the meals arrived, but George didn't follow my wishes. So he turned to me and said that, so you're from Finland and you teach here at the university, so what do you think about American education, American schools? And I didn't quite know how to get away this situation, because my opinion obviously was very different from what he was saying. And because he had much more authority than I followed my grandmother's voice that I heard somewhere in the back of my mind saying that, don't talk about the things that you don't quite understand. So I look at George and say that, George, I would rather answer this question because there are so many things that I don't understand in American schools, American education. Although I have been here, I lived a good part of this century here in the United States, but I still don't understand enough to be able to not talk about that. And he looked at me and said that, so what are the things that you don't understand in American schools or education here? I look at George and say that, one of those things that I really don't understand after all these years that I have been here and I have seen hundreds of schools, I've visited almost all the states here, but I still don't understand why in this country you are not using those innovations, those ideas and theories and knowledge that has made my country's school system great. And not only education schools in Finland, but also in Canada and Singapore and now China and the Netherlands, many other countries that are doing very well in education comparisons. That we are using American knowledge and innovation. It's not Finnish ideas. And when I look at the states here in the United States that has a kind of a final say about education, or even the districts or individual schools, I don't really see the same things that work in other countries used in education policies and improvement here in America. And I saw that George was clearly a kind of a disturbed about this notion. And he turned to me and I tried to eat my lunch and he said that, Pasi, I'm a practical person, which I believed. If you're a farmer, you have to be a practical man. But he said that I'm a practical person, so can you give me an example? And this is George. So he said, can you give me an example of one American idea that is not used in education reforms or policies here in the United States or even in any of the states that you have used in Finland to improve your school system? And I said, I'm very happy to do that, George. And I said that, one of probably the best idea that I can give you about this is what we called a theory of multiple intelligences. And this is something that my colleague and my friend, Howard Gardner, who teaches and researches at Harvard University, created more than 30 years ago. In the early 1980s, he wrote a book of frames of mind that explains this idea that people come with the different talents, different intelligences, that we are not smart in just one or two or three things. We can be smart and talented in different ways. And we read those books, and we translated them into Finnish, because that's our language. And we liked that theory, that idea so much, that we took it as a kind of a foundation for our education, for the curriculum and how to prepare teachers and everything. That we assume that when children come to school, they come with the different frames of mind, and that the school has to be a place where these different intelligences, different talents can be developed and advanced and cultivated. But I don't see these Gardner's theories and ideas used in the reforms here in America. So George took his pen, and there was a little menu card on the table, so he was about to write. He said, so what is this theory called? And I said, right there, the theory of multiple intelligences. And then he looked at me and said, and who was this guy? And I said, George, he's not a guy. It's a Harvard professor, Howard Gardner, who made this thing. So he wrote everything down, and we started to eat. But George didn't let me go. He turned to me again and said, Pasi, can you give me another example? And I thought that now George is getting really interested in this thing, which was a good sign, because I was hoping that maybe this gentleman that obviously has a lot of power, both political and otherwise, would go away from this conference and say that now I understand what we should do here in America. So I said that I'm happy to give you another example. So I said that, George, somewhere in 1980s, about 30 years ago, when Finland, when we were building our school system, we came across something called cooperative learning, and many of you probably know what it is. Cooperative learning is an idea, an innovation where large class like this would be broken down into groups of 3 or 4 students or people, and then teaching and learning will be organized that way. And there's a lot of research about that. And that's a truly American innovation and idea, developed here in several universities, University of Minnesota, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, many other places. And most of the work, the development work, has been done in the United States. So it's a truly American idea, cooperative learning. And I explained, George, how in Finland, when we learn about this thing, we immediately realized that this is the way to make everybody in our school system to learn. So we took cooperative learning as a basis for what we do in schools. All the teachers learn in the teacher training not only to understand cooperative learning, but also how to use it in the classes. Our curriculum and the philosophy, the whole approach to teaching and learning is based on this idea of helping young people to learn together. And I said to George that I believe that this is one reason why we have been doing that well. And it's not only Finland, I said to George. If you don't like Finland, look at Canada or Singapore or the Netherlands, many other countries that are doing also well, and they have done exactly the same thing. And I saw that George was getting increasingly puzzled. So we continued eating, and I saw that George was thinking about these things, and he turned back to me once again. And he said, Pasi, give me a third example. And then I was absolutely clear that George had seen the light, that he had understood something fundamental in improving American education. But, you know, I'm an educator, but there's a little entrepreneur somewhere within me. And this little entrepreneur said to me please say, George, the following. So I look at George and say, George, I can give you 2 of these examples for free, but the third one will cost you a lot of money. And George turned to me and said, okay, today I'm going to announce, and this is true, he said, today I'm going to announce that I'm going to be running for the President of the United States. And I turned to George and said that, you know, if you're successful, if you make your way all the way to the White House, give me a call, and I'll come and advise you for free. So this is all true. So we had a wonderful conversation, but it was time to go for the talk. And there was a little distance between the restaurant and the venue where we went. So we were walking there from the restaurant to the lecture hall, and we didn't say anything. We walked side by side. And I almost heard George thinking that maybe the solution here in the United States is not to try to discover and find yet another innovation, another idea that we are not using, but the Finns and the Canadians and others are making a good benefit out of. Maybe the issue is with the implementation. Maybe we should look back a little bit and try to identify all those rich and valuable and powerful ideas here in America and spend more money in implementing those things. I was sure that this is what George was thinking. We went to the lecture hall like this, and of course George, because he's a more better known and powerful person than I am, he went to speak first. So he took the podium, and I held my chair because I was absolutely sure that he will take his speech, tear it off, and say that I'm not going to read my speech, but I'm going to tell you what I learned during the lunch from this Finnish man over here. But that didn't happen. George went to the podium, and he gave exactly the same speech that he gave to me about how bad American teachers are, how poor the schools are, and how children have to try harder, study longer, and you know all those things that you know. And I was very disappointed. And so was George, because he couldn't make it to the White House. But seriously, you know, I was thinking that it probably just takes one person to speak a little bit differently about the issues here in the United States. And I have a lot of appreciation for the legacy of the American education, because still today, my estimate is that about 80% of all the innovation, research, knowledge, understanding when it comes to teaching and learning and schools and education comes from the United States of America. Okay? So let me quickly share with you 3 myths that I find equally disturbing. These myths I call urban legends here, because I don't think that there is really a basis to kind of a belief that this would be true. And these are very common things that you often hear in political events and the media and many other things. And these include things like American education is expensive, that is more expensive than practically any other education anywhere in the world, that the kids have too little instruction in the school. That's why they have to have longer days and they have to study in the summertime, and that the quality and the overall performance in America is next to the bottom, right? You have heard about those, right? Now, let me show you a little bit of information about each of these things. So the myth number one here, the urban legend number one here in the United States, says that the US spends more in education than all the others. If you look at this graph, this is the latest internationally comparable information that you can find from the OECD database. This red bar there is the United States of America. So we are looking at what proportion of your national wealth, or GDP if you wish, is spent on primary to tertiary education in different countries. And you can very quickly see that the United States is at the part of the chart where the countries are spending relatively less of their national wealth on education than the others. Okay, so if you add here the private proportion, kind of a money from private pockets, then the picture, of course, changes. But I think the significant, important indicator is to ask the question that how much of the national wealth that you have, or we have, or the Canadians have, goes to education. And the United States is not really spending that much. Okay, so there's not really a room to argue that American education, the country is spending more in education than all the others. So that's not true, that's clearly a myth. Then the other myth is that the US students spend less time in school than others. I'm sure that you have heard about that. People often refer to 180 days in annual calendar and many other things, but just take a look at this. This shows you comparable amount of hours in those little numbers here. 10 and 9 in the United States means 9 years of primary and lower secondary schooling. Again, American children seem to be spending more time than almost anybody else in the world in compulsory instruction. Finland is there on the other side of the mark. So the issue is not about lack of instruction time for children. So this is a myth, and this is a very important myth, because the solution is not more giving children more time. And then the third one, and this is probably the most significant one and most common myth, is that the US school system performs worse than others. Now, I had to clarify a little bit what the performance, what do we mean by performance. Often people, when America and other countries are compared to one another, we just look at the test scores, the international tests. But here, what we can do now is we can combine the equity, in other words, how the school system is dealing and coping with the children with the inequalities and different backgrounds when they come to school, and then the quality as well. That's why this red circle over there represents the poor performance. If you are there, it means that you are really doing poorly with equity and quality. That's a place where you are. And the blue one there, that's the place where the high-performing or best education systems are. Now, based on your own information and understanding, where do you think the United States would be? Where would you place the United States of America in this international OECD study? That's the only one that we can use. That is looking at the 15-year-olds in math and reading and science. But where would you place USA here? Where? Bottom left. How many of you think that America is in a red circle? Raise your hand. Okay. How many you think that America is in a blue one? Blue circle. Okay. Now, this is interesting, because the United States is almost in the middle. So there's no room to say that American school system is doing poorly. It's not excellent either, but it's somewhere, it's very, very near the international average in quality and equity as well. This is UK, this is Canada. Canada is an amazing performer in education. So if you don't like small countries like Finland as a comparison, go to Canada, because that's where they do amazing things. And there's Japan, Estonia, and Finland. The 4 countries are there in the blue, so-called high-performing education systems. And these are the other OECD, the wealthiest, richest countries in the world. And you can see that there's a very strong, clear correlation between the equity and quality here. But this data alone, and this is the only one that we can reliably use to compare countries' performance, very clearly indicates that American school system, as indicated by the OECD studies, is not doing that poorly. So in other words, that it's a myth to say that America is next to the lowest performing systems. Now, finally, let me give you a fact. I don't know if you know this, but for me, this is one of the most disturbing facts when I think about this country that I love very much. My grandfather was American, and as I said, I've lived here more than 10 years in US, including 5 years in Washington, DC, but I'm fine now. But you know, this is some of those things that people rarely speak when we speak about education or innovation or improving schools, is that internationally this country cares much less than almost any other country, wealthy country in the world, about families, mothers and children. This week on Sunday we're going to have, are you going to have a Mother's Day, right? Mother's Day on Sunday, I think we do. And every week this year, the Save the Children organization publishes so-called Mother Index, where they compare different countries in terms of how good or poor place it is to be a mother. So this Mother Index is looking at mothers' conditions at home, the health care, the prenatal care, early childhood education, mother's health, and many other things. And then ranks countries from the bottom to the best. And I'm going to show you something that is quite interesting here. On the vertical side, you will see the Mother Index. This is the last one from last year, so the new one will come later this week. And then on the horizontal line, you'll see the percentage of women in power, in politics, in this case, in Washington, D.C., in your Congress. Now, where do you think the United States of America is in this ranking? Okay, so if you have more women in power, you go from left to right, and if this is a good country to be a mother, raise children, and do all those things, you go up here. Exactly. One of the worst countries in this respect. And where do you think Finland is? We are over there. Okay, so and this is where all the others are. And this is the regression or correlation, showing the very, very strong correlation between, you know, giving women more power, political power, and how that power is turned into being a better place to have children and families. And why this is important? This is important because it makes all the difference to have a circumstances or environment for children to do well in school. It's a big difference. So that's why the improving education in many cases is not only about the innovation within the education system, it's also innovation on improving the conditions for particularly mothers and children at home. So finally, what is the conclusion here? Just give you one conclusion that I take from this story and this data that you see here. Just like I said earlier, that I think in this country, if I was the King of America, and maybe some people think that it would be a good idea to have a King of America right now, but if I was a King of America, and I would have a power to say something about education, first of all, I think that in this country, there are many people who are addicted to reform, that the reform is kind of something that we have to do with this addiction. But what I would do as a king is to shift a significant amount of resources from trying to invent new things all the time to implement those old ideas, or American ideas that have made other countries great. It's a simple lesson like this. I love innovation. I think we need to improve and figure out new ways to do many things. But we know already so much about what works, and therefore I think this implementation that is much more difficult than inventing new things is something that would be a key to better success here in the United States. Thank you.